Alright, let's talk about something that sounds like it should be impossible, but in Warhammer 40k, nothing is ever that simple. The Inquisition, the most secretive and powerful arm of the Imperium, is supposed to be humanity's last line of defense against heresy, Xenos corruption, and demonic invasion. But what if I told you that some of its greatest battles aren't fought against the enemies of mankind, but between its own members? Behind the scenes, the three main factions of the Inquisition, Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Xenos, are locked in a shadow war. A war fought in whispered accusations, secret assassinations, and carefully orchestrated purges. Each Ordo claims to be acting in the Imperium's best interests, yet they often see each other as threats just as dangerous as the horrors they're sworn to destroy. So why do these powerful factions, all supposedly serving the Emperor, find themselves at odds? And how far are they willing to go to prove that their vision of the Imperium is the right one? The Inquisition isn't a monolithic, all-knowing force. It's not a well-oiled machine where every cog moves in perfect unison. No, it's more like a battlefield, a constant tug-of-war between ideologies, egos, and agendas, where unity is often an illusion. At the heart of this conflict are the three great Ordos: Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Xenos. Each was created for a singular purpose, but over time their roles and their methods have evolved in ways that often bring them into conflict. Ordo Hereticus is the most infamous among them, the hammer that crushes heretics, mutants, and rogue psychers before they can infect the Imperium from within. These are the witch hunters, the ones who see treachery in every shadow and corruption in every soul. To them, purity is survival, and anyone who even flirts with forbidden knowledge is a threat. Ordo Malleus, on the other hand, deals with an even darker enemy, the forces of chaos itself. These Inquisitors don't just hunt heretics. They wage war against the demons of the warp, the entities that can twist reality and possess the minds of the weak. Unlike the Hereticus, who believe any touch of corruption must be burned away, the Malleus often tread a dangerous line, using forbidden knowledge and even demon weapons to fight fire with fire. To some, they're heroes. To others, they're little better than the very monsters they claim to battle. And then there's Ordo Xenos, the enigmatic faction tasked with protecting the Imperium from alien influence. Their mission is clear: wipe out any Xenos threat before it can take root in humanity's empire. But unlike the other Ordos, the Xenos often operate in ways that seem outright heretical. They don't just kill aliens. They study them, manipulate them, even use their technology to further their own ends. To an outsider, they might seem dangerously close to heresy themselves. Each Ordo believes in the righteousness of its cause, and each sees the others as being too reckless, too naive, or too extreme. Their conflicts aren't just philosophical, they spill into real battles, fought in the shadows, where the only rule is that the Imperium itself must never know what's happening. Because if the common citizen ever discovered that the Inquisition is at war with itself, the very foundation of the Imperium could crumble. The Inquisition isn't a single unified force. It's a web of secretive, paranoid, and dangerously powerful individuals who operate with absolute authority, but often in complete opposition to one another. If the Imperium were a living body, the Inquisition would be its immune system. But what happens when different parts of that system start attacking each other, convinced that they alone understand what's best for humanity? That's where things get complicated. At the core of this internal struggle are three main factions, each with its own vision of how to protect the Imperium. Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Xenos, three orders that are supposed to work together, yet often find themselves at each other's throats. The Imperium is full of threats, but to these Inquisitors, the most dangerous enemy is often standing right beside them. Ordo Hereticus is the most feared and arguably the most fanatical. These are the witch hunters, the ones who believe that corruption doesn't start with Xenos invasions or demonic incursions. It starts from within. Heretics, traitors, rogue psychers, and even entire planetary governments fall under their scrutiny. They work closely with the Adepta Sororitas, using fire and faith to purge any sign of deviation from the Emperor's will. To them, the biggest threat isn't an external force, it's the gradual erosion of humanity's purity. That's why they look at Ordo Xenos with suspicion. Studying alien technology, trying to manipulate Xeno species, that's a one-way ticket to corruption. And as for Ordo Malleus, well, anyone who fights demons for too long risks becoming one. Ordo Malleus operates in the darkest corners of the galaxy, facing horrors that most Imperial citizens don't even know exist. To the common man, chaos is a whisper, a bedtime story meant to scare children. To the Inquisitors of Malleus, it's a living, breathing nightmare that can manifest at any moment. They don't just fight heresy, they battle the demons of the warp themselves. And here's the problem: fighting chaos changes you. You can't understand it, predict it, or counter it without getting dangerously close to it. Ordo Malleus Inquisitors are some of the most radical in the Inquisition because they often use forbidden knowledge, demon weapons, and psychic abilities to fight the enemy on its own terms. To Ordo Hereticus, this is blasphemy. To Ordo Xenos, it's reckless. To Ordo Malleus, it's necessary. Because if they don't do it, who will? And then there's Ordo Xenos. To many, they're the most pragmatic, and in some ways, the most dangerous. The Imperium's official stance is clear. Xenos are to be exterminated, nothing more. But the Inquisitors of Ordo Xenos know that reality is far more complicated. The Eldar can sometimes be allies. Necron technology can be repurposed. Even the Tyranids, in the right circumstances, can be manipulated. They walk a fine line, balancing extermination with exploitation. To them, knowledge is a weapon, one that can be turned against humanity's enemies. But to Ordo Hereticus, their willingness to engage with alien artifacts and cultures is dangerously close to treason. This ideological divide isn't just a difference in philosophy, it's a battlefield. When Inquisitors clash, it's not an open war. There are no legions of troops, no grand declarations. It happens in the shadows, through assassinations, secret trials, and purges disguised as routine operations. One Inquisitor might declare another an enemy of the Imperium, using their authority to turn the full force of the Inquisition against them. Entire warbands, entire planets can be swept away in the process. This isn't just theory. It's happened time and time again in Warhammer 40k's history. One of the most infamous examples is the war between Inquisitor Cryptman of Ordo Xenos and his rivals within the Inquisition. Cryptman saw the Tyranids as an existential threat, so much so that he enacted a radical strategy, destroying entire human worlds to deny the Great Devourer its food supply. To Ordo Hereticus, this was madness. To Ordo Malleus, it was a distraction from the greater war against chaos. He was excommunicated, but that didn't stop him. Cryptman continued his work in exile, proving that in the Inquisition, even being branded a traitor doesn't mean you stop fighting for the Imperium, and that's the terrifying part. The Inquisition doesn't operate with oversight. There's no checks and balances, no higher authority keeping them in line. They answer only to the Emperor, and he's not exactly available for a review of their actions. So when Inquisitors go to war with each other, it's not just a personal vendetta. It's a battle for the soul of the Imperium itself. Each Ordo believes that they alone understand the true path to humanity's survival. But in their endless war against heresy, demons, and Xenos, they've created another war, one that's fought in secret, in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And in a universe where humanity is already on the brink of annihilation, the last thing the Imperium needs is its own protectors turning against each other. There's a saying among those who know the Inquisition's ways: the only thing more dangerous than a heretic is the one who hunts them. And nowhere is this more evident than in the uneasy, often volatile relationship between Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus. On paper, they should be allies. Both are sworn to protect the Imperium from internal threats. Both are relentless in their pursuit of the enemy. Both believe in the necessity of extreme measures. But here's the problem. They don't trust each other. In fact, they might just hate each other more than they hate the enemies they're supposed to fight. The tension comes down to one fundamental difference: how they define corruption. To Ordo Hereticus, corruption is a slow, insidious disease that infects humanity from within. It starts small: a rogue psyker who wasn't culled, an imperial official who reads the wrong texts, a preacher who allows too much interpretation of the emperor's will. And if you don't stop it early, if you don't purge it before it spreads, it grows into full-blown heresy. That's why Ordo Hereticus operates with absolute brutal efficiency. To them, the mere suspicion of corruption is enough to justify execution. Better to burn 100 innocent souls than let a single heretic slip through the cracks. Ordo Malleus, on the other hand, deals with a completely different kind of corruption. They fight chaos in its rawest, most horrifying form. Demons that can rip through reality, warp storms that can swallow entire star systems, cults that summon horrors beyond comprehension. And here's the thing: you can't fight chaos without understanding it. You can't stop demons without knowing their nature. The best demon hunters aren't the ones who blindly charge in with flamers and bolters. They're the ones who study the enemy, learn its weaknesses, and sometimes even use its own weapons against it. And that's exactly why Ordo Hereticus sees Ordo Malleus as a threat. Because from their perspective, the line between fighting chaos and becoming chaos is razor thin. Too many inquisitors of Malleus have dabbled in forbidden lore, wielded demon weapons, or made pacts with entities they claim to control. To Ordo Hereticus, this isn't just dangerous, it's outright treason. If they had their way, half of Ordo Malleus would be burned at the stake before they had a chance to accidentally become the very monsters they fight. But Ordo Malleus has its own opinions about Ordo Hereticus, and they're just as damning. To them, the Hereticus Inquisitors are short-sighted zealots who don't understand the scale of the war they're fighting. Chaos isn't something you can eradicate with fire and dogma. It's an existential threat that requires knowledge, strategy, and sometimes, yes, the use of forbidden power. Malleus Inquisitors see themselves as warriors fighting a war that humanity barely comprehends, while Hereticus Inquisitors are stuck in their witch-hunting obsessions, too focused on minor heresies to realize that the galaxy is on the brink of annihilation. This ideological divide isn't just a philosophical debate. It's led to real conflict. There have been multiple cases in Warhammer's lore where Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus Inquisitors have turned on each other, sometimes in spectacularly destructive ways. One of the most infamous instances involved an Inquisitor of Malleus who had used demon-forged weapons to slay a Chaos Lord. To Ordo Malleus, this was a necessary sacrifice. To Ordo Hereticus, it was proof of his corruption. The result? A secret war that wiped out entire planetary populations, all because two factions of the Inquisition couldn't agree on what counted as heresy. Even when they're not outright fighting, their methods clash constantly. Ordo Hereticus operates through fear and overwhelming force. When they arrive on a planet, everyone from the highest noble to the lowest worker knows that mass executions are imminent. Ordo Malleus, on the other hand, prefers secrecy. They can't afford to let the average imperial citizen know that demons are real. To them, fear isn't a weapon, it's a liability. And that's another reason why they distrust Ordo Hereticus. A Hereticus purge can expose hidden chaos cults, sure, but it can also drive terrified civilians into the arms of the very demonic forces they fear. The two factions don't just disagree on tactics, they actively undermine each other's work. And here's the biggest irony. Despite their mutual distrust, despite the blood they've spilled fighting each other, both factions ultimately want the same thing: the preservation of the Imperium. But their hatred for each other has become so ingrained, so fundamental to their existence, that cooperation is almost impossible. They would rather see the other side destroyed than admit that they might need them. This war isn't fought on open battlefields. It's fought in the corridors of power, in whispered accusations and covert assassinations. It's fought in the erasure of names, the sudden disappearances of inquisitors who knew too much. The Imperium will never acknowledge it, but the Inquisition is at war with itself. And in a galaxy where humanity is already teetering on the edge of oblivion, that might be the most dangerous war of all. The Imperium of Man was built on the idea that humanity is the rightful ruler of the galaxy, and anything that doesn't belong to mankind is a threat to be eradicated. Simple, right? Well, not if you ask Ordo Xenos. They are the ones who dedicate their lives to studying, hunting, and manipulating alien species, not just for the sake of extermination, but for understanding. And that, right there, is the problem. Because to Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus, what Ordo Xenos does looks a lot like heresy. To the witch hunters of Ordo Hereticus, everything about Ordo Xenos is suspicious. These inquisitors are supposed to be purging alien influence from the Imperium, but instead, they're out there collecting Xenos artifacts, making deals with Eldar, and dissecting Tyranids like they're studying a particularly interesting insect. Hereticus inquisitors see corruption everywhere, and what could be more corrupt than an Imperial official willingly engaging with the very creatures the Emperor declared unclean? It doesn't help that some of the most infamous inquisitors to fall into outright treachery started in Ordo Xenos. Ever heard of the Herusians? The radicals who believe the Emperor could be reborn, using the powers of chaos? A lot of them came from Ordo Xenos because they've already spent years rationalizing the idea of using alien knowledge to strengthen humanity. But the real hatred between these factions isn't just about ideology. It's about control. Ordo Hereticus operates through sheer dominance. Burn the books, kill the heretics, purge anything that deviates from the purest form of imperial doctrine. Ordo Xenos, meanwhile, thrives on secrecy and knowledge. That means they hide things. They keep dangerous artifacts out of Hereticus' hands. They make decisions that they believe serve the Imperium, even if it means ignoring the strict dogma that Hereticus enforces. To Ordo Hereticus, that kind of autonomy is unacceptable, and when Hereticus inquisitors feel like they're being kept in the dark, their first instinct is to start burning everything until they find out why. If that sounds bad, the relationship between Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus is even more complicated. See Ordo? Malleus inquisitors are used to dealing with threats that are both seductive and incredibly dangerous. Demons offer power in exchange for loyalty, and it's a trap that has ensnared even the strongest-willed warriors. So when Malleus sees Ordo Xenos making use of Xenos artifacts, working with alien races, or, Emperor forbid, using Xenos weapons, they see the exact same pattern playing out. It's the same road to damnation, just with a different name. To Malleus, an inquisitor who thinks they can control Xenos influence is no different from a fool who thinks they can control a demon. Both are walking straight into corruption, whether they realize it or not. This paranoia isn't entirely unfounded. The history of Ordo Xenos is littered with radical inquisitors who believed they had found some kind of ultimate solution through alien technology or alliances. Some of them even attempted to merge human and Xenos biology, believing that humanity could be improved by adopting the best traits of its enemies. That's not just heresy, it's blasphemy on a level that would make even the most radical Ordo Malleus inquisitor recoil. And yet, these people exist. Some are hunted down and destroyed. Others operate in secret, always one step ahead of their former allies. And yet, for all the hatred they get from the other two factions, Ordo Xenos isn't wrong about everything. The Imperium is failing. It's bloated, inefficient, and dying under the weight of its own bureaucracy. Xenos threats aren't going away. Tyranids, Orcs, the Necron dynasties, they're getting stronger. Ordo Xenos is the only faction that even tries to understand these threats on a deeper level. They aren't just exterminators. They're strategists, scientists, and, in some cases, pragmatists who know that not every war can be won with brute force alone. That's why they're willing to make deals when necessary. The Eldar have their own agendas, but sometimes those agendas align with humanity's survival. Necron technology is impossibly advanced. Why waste it when it could be repurposed for the Imperium's benefit? Even the Tau, with their absurd philosophy of the greater good, can sometimes be manipulated into fighting the right enemies. None of this means Ordo Xenos trusts Xenos. They know the dangers better than anyone. But unlike Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus, they don't believe in blind destruction. They believe in using every tool available, no matter how controversial, to ensure humanity's dominance. And that's exactly why the other two Ordos can't stand them. Ordo Hereticus sees them as reckless manipulators who put the Imperium's soul at risk. Ordo Malleus sees them as arrogant fools who think they're immune to corruption. And Ordo Xenos? Well, they see the others as blind fanatics who would rather watch humanity burn than adapt to the changing galaxy. This conflict plays out in countless ways. Hereticus Inquisitors sabotaging Ordo Xenos research labs, executing radical Inquisitors before they can complete their work. Malleus agents intercepting and destroying Xenos artifacts that Xenos Inquisitors were trying to study. Entire warbands being wiped out in accidents that just so happen to eliminate inconvenient Inquisitors. None of it is ever spoken about openly. None of it is ever acknowledged. But it happens, over and over again. And in the end, the greatest irony is this. While these factions fight each other in the shadows, the real threats to the Imperium continue to grow. Tyranid hive fleets consume entire sectors, Necron tomb worlds awaken. Orc warlords gather for another great wah. The galaxy doesn't care about the Inquisition's internal struggles. And if the Imperium ever falls, it won't be because of Xenos, heretics, or demons. It'll be because the people who were supposed to protect it were too busy fighting each other to see the real enemy coming. The Inquisition's internal wars aren't just about Ordo versus Ordo, the real struggle, the one that defines how the Inquisition operates at every level, comes from something even deeper, ideological factionalism. Every Inquisitor, no matter their Ordo, falls somewhere on the spectrum between two extremes, the Purists and the Radicals. And when these two sides collide, the consequences can be just as catastrophic as any war against heretics, demons, or Xenos. Purists believe in the absolute sanctity of the Emperor's will. To them, the Imperium may be flawed, but it is still humanity's only hope, and its traditions, laws, and doctrines must be upheld at all costs. They believe in total eradication of heresy, of alien influence, of any knowledge that could destabilize humanity's faith. There is no compromise. No forbidden technology is worth studying. No enemy is worth reasoning with. No radical solution is ever acceptable, no matter how practical it may seem. These Inquisitors see themselves as the last guardians of purity in a universe constantly trying to corrupt them. Radicals, on the other hand, see the Imperium for what it really is, a crumbling empire desperately clinging to outdated dogma while the galaxy changes around it. To them, survival is the only thing that matters. If that means using alien weapons, so be it. If that means wielding demon-forged artifacts against chaos, it's a necessary evil. If that means turning the tools of the enemy against them, then it's a risk worth taking. Radicals believe that the Emperor's true will isn't found in blind faith, but in results. And if the only way to save humanity is to break the rules, then they'll do it without hesitation. This divide isn't just theoretical. It shapes every single decision an Inquisitor makes, and it determines who they trust, or more importantly, who they don't trust. A radical from Ordo Xenos might have more in common with a radical from Ordo Malleus than with a fellow Xenos Inquisitor who follows Purist doctrine. A Hereticus Purist might consider an Ordo Malleus radical just as much of a threat as an actual chaos cultist. This means that the Inquisition isn't just split into 3 Ordos. It's split into endless sub-factions, all maneuvering, conspiring, and when necessary, eliminating their rivals in the name of their own version of the Imperium's salvation. One of the most extreme examples of this divide is the infamous Thorian movement. Thorians believe that the Emperor can be resurrected, not in some distant metaphorical sense, but literally. They believe that a new host could be prepared, a perfect vessel to house the Emperor's divine essence, allowing him to walk among mankind once again. Some Thorians work within the system, searching for powerful psychers who might serve as potential hosts. Others take things further, dabbling in warp sorcery, forbidden biomantic research, even investigating Xenos methods of consciousness transfer. To purists, Thorians are heretics in all but name, but to many radicals, they're visionaries. Then there are the Istvanians, who believe that a war and strife are necessary for humanity to evolve. To them, peace is stagnation, and only through constant conflict can the Imperium become strong enough to survive. Istvanians have been known to instigate conflicts, deliberately allowing uprisings, rebellions, and wars to escalate, believing that the suffering they cause is ultimately for the greater good. Needless to say, most purists see Istvanians as dangerous lunatics. And then there's the most infamous radical faction of all, the Herusians. Unlike Thorians who want to resurrect the Emperor, Herusians believe that humanity can create a new, stronger leader by harnessing the power of chaos itself. They study the Primarchs, the nature of demonic possession, and the possibility of binding warp entities to human hosts. They believe that the tragedy of Horus wasn't that he fell, but that he failed. If someone could master the power that consumed him, if the right person could harness the strength of chaos without succumbing to it, they could become a godlike ruler who would reshape the Imperium into something truly unstoppable. Even other radicals see Herusians as dangerous, but to purists, they're outright traitors. This constant divide means that, more often than not, an Inquisitor will trust someone from a different Ordo who shares their ideological beliefs over someone from their own faction who doesn't. A purist from Ordo Hereticus might see a radical from Ordo Xenos as a bigger threat than a genestealer cult. A radical from Ordo Malleus might work alongside a radical from Ordo Xenos to secure a Xenos artifact that could be used against chaos, even if it means defying every law of the Imperium. The result? A secret war within a secret war. The Inquisition is already divided by Ordo, but these ideological conflicts cut even deeper. The battles fought between purists and radicals aren't waged with armies. They're waged in the corridors of power, in whispered deals and backroom betrayals, in assassinations, disguised as accidents and purges justified by fabricated evidence. Some of the greatest wars in the Imperium's history didn't start because of external threats, but because of the Inquisition's own internal conflicts. Entire sectors have been purged, entire planets burned, because one Inquisitor decided that another Inquisitor's beliefs were too dangerous to tolerate. The Imperium will never acknowledge this war. To the average citizen, the Inquisition is a monolithic force of unquestionable authority. But behind the curtain, the reality is far more complex. The Inquisition isn't united. It never has been. It's a battlefield where every Inquisitor is both a warrior and a potential target, where alliances shift constantly, and where no one, no matter how powerful, is ever truly safe. And the scariest part, this war will never end. Because as long as Inquisitors exist, as long as humanity struggles to survive in an uncaring galaxy, there will always be those who believe they alone hold the key to the Imperium's future. And as history has shown time and time again, when someone in the Inquisition believes they're the only one who's right, there's nothing they won't do to prove it. The Inquisition's war with itself isn't just an abstract ideological struggle. It's real, it's bloody, and it's been happening for thousands of years in the darkest corners of the Imperium. While the common citizen will never hear about it, and most Adeptus Administratum scribes would swear on their lives that it doesn't exist, those who truly understand the Inquisition know the truth. Inquisitors fight each other just as often as they fight the Imperium's enemies. The only difference is that their battles are fought in the shadows, hidden behind forged reports, falsified accusations, and assassinations that never leave a trace. One of the most infamous cases of an Inquisition civil war was the Mobian Purge. What started as a routine heresy investigation on a distant imperial world spiraled into a full-blown war between rival inquisitors, each convinced that the other was the true threat. Ordo Hereticus, ever the fanatics, declared that a small cult uprising was part of a grand chaos conspiracy and moved to exterminate the planet's ruling elite just to be safe. Ordo Xenos, however, had been monitoring the same world and believed the real danger came not from heretics, but from a Xenos artifact buried beneath the planet's surface, one that could be weaponized if it fell into the wrong hands. When Hereticus forces moved to purge the planet, Xenos inquisitors tried to stop them, claiming that their actions would destroy crucial intelligence. The result? A brutal hidden war that led to the deaths of not just the cultists, but the world's entire population. And the best part? Officially, it was recorded as a successful operation. No one outside the Inquisition ever knew that it had been an Inquisition war that doomed that world. Not chaos, not Xenos, not even treachery, but a simple refusal to compromise. Another legendary case of Inquisition infighting happened during the reign of the infamous Inquisitor Cryptman. Most people know him as the man who enacted the Cryptman Gambit, a radical, horrifyingly pragmatic strategy to slow the Tyranid advance. But what fewer people realize is that his own peers turned on him. His decision to enact exterminatus on imperial worlds just to starve the Tyranids was controversial enough. But what really turned the Inquisition against him was his willingness to manipulate Xenos forces to do his dirty work. He used captured genostealers as bioweapons, lured the Tyranids into attacking Orc empires to thin their numbers, and engaged in tactics that horrified even the most radical of his allies. Eventually, he was declared excommunicate traitoris, not by the imperium at large, but by other inquisitors who decided that his methods were too extreme. And yet, despite his exile, Cryptman continued his work, operating in secret still, convinced that he was the only one who truly understood the Tyranid threat. Sometimes these hidden wars don't just involve inquisitors. It drags entire military forces into the conflict without them even realizing it. The Badab War is a prime example. On the surface, it was a war between the Imperium and the secessionist Astral Claws Space Marines. But behind the scenes, the war was shaped by an unseen battle between different inquisitorial factions, each trying to manipulate the outcome to serve their own agenda. Some wanted the Astral Claws wiped out entirely, while others believed they could be salvaged and turned back into loyal Imperial forces. Some even suspected that there were Inquisitors who wanted to use the war as a test, to see if Space Marines could be controlled more effectively through political maneuvering rather than direct force. The result was a conflict that could have been contained early, but instead escalated into a war that cost countless lives and resources, all because the Inquisition couldn't agree on a single course of action. Perhaps one of the darkest examples of inquisitorial infighting was the War of the Vanishing Suns. This was a conflict that no Imperial citizen would ever hear about, a war fought entirely within the shadows of the Imperium's power structure. Ordo Malleus radicals, convinced that a high-ranking Imperial official had been tainted by chaos, orchestrated a covert campaign to remove him. But here's the catch. Ordo Hereticus had already investigated him and cleared him of any wrongdoing. When Malleus Inquisitors moved against him, Hereticus Inquisitors fought back, believing that their rivals had fallen into paranoia, or worse, were using their war against chaos as an excuse to seize power. The result? A shadow war fought across multiple worlds, where entire planetary governments were wiped out, not because they were traitors, but because they had the misfortune of being caught in the crossfire between two factions of the same organization. By the end of it, the official record showed that the conflict had been caused by a chaos uprising. But the truth was far simpler. It had been a war between inquisitors, and the only reason it ended was because both sides had lost too many operatives to continue fighting. And these are just the incidents that we know about. How many other wars, purges, and planetary-scale disasters have been orchestrated not by the Imperium's enemies, but by its own supposed protectors? How many times has an Ordo declared another Ordo a threat, eliminated them, and covered up the evidence? The Inquisition is the most secretive organization in the galaxy. If they can erase entire civilizations, what makes you think they wouldn't erase their own history when it becomes inconvenient? The terrifying truth is that the Inquisition isn't just at war with heretics, Xenos, and demons. It's at war with itself. And unlike the battles fought against the Imperium's external enemies, this war has no clear front lines, no grand armies, no definitive victories. It's a war fought in whispers, in poisoned words and sudden disappearances, in quiet executions and rewritten records. And it will never end. Because as long as the Inquisition exists, as long as its members have the power to act unchecked, they will always see enemies not just outside their ranks, but within them. The Inquisition is supposed to be the Imperium's ultimate safeguard, the one institution that stands above politics, bureaucracy, and personal ambition. But the truth is far messier. The Inquisition isn't just divided by ideology. It has, on multiple occasions, erupted into outright civil war. These conflicts, known as the Inquisitorial Wars, have left entire sectors in ruin, weakened the Imperium's defenses, and in some cases, almost destroyed it from within. One of the most infamous incidents was the Apostasy Wars, a series of brutal conflicts that shook the Imperium to its core. It all started with High Lord Goga von Dire, a man whose paranoia and lust for power led to one of the darkest periods in Imperial history. Van Dire didn't just rule, he ruled through terror, using his control over the Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition to purge anyone who stood in his way. The problem? The Inquisition wasn't united behind him. While Ordo Hereticus saw him as a necessary force of stability, others in the Inquisition, particularly those aligned with Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus, recognized the danger he posed. His purges weren't about rooting out corruption. They were about consolidating power, eliminating rivals, and turning the Inquisition into his personal enforcer corps. What followed was nothing short of a disaster. Inquisitors turned on each other, some swearing loyalty to Van Dire, others waging a shadow war to bring him down. The battles were fought in secret at first. Assassinations, betrayals, and quiet eliminations of those deemed too dangerous. But as tensions escalated, it became impossible to keep the conflict in the shadows. Entire planets were thrown into chaos as inquisitorial factions used military force to crush their opponents. Even the Adeptus Astartes were drawn into the fighting, with some chapters siding with Van Dire's loyalists, while others saw him as a threat to the Imperium itself. The war only ended when Van Dire was finally overthrown, thanks in no small part to an unlikely alliance between the Inquisition's rebels and the Adepta Sororitas, who had once been his most loyal followers. But the damage was already done. The Inquisition had been exposed as an institution that was far from incorruptible. The Imperium had come dangerously close to tearing itself apart, not because of external enemies, but because of the unchecked ambition of a single man and the willingness of some inquisitors to serve him. But the Apostasy Wars weren't the only time the Inquisition nearly shattered the Imperium. Another infamous case was the War of the Progenium Scourging. This war started as a disagreement between Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos over the use of Schola Progenium facilities, imperial academies where the most promising orphans of the Imperium were trained to become future officers, commissars, and even inquisitors. Ordo Hereticus viewed these institutions as sacred, believing that they should be kept pure and free of any outside influence. Ordo Xenos, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. They believed that some of the brightest minds from these academies should be exposed to Xenos intelligence and technology, carefully trained to understand and counter alien threats more effectively. What started as a bureaucratic dispute quickly escalated into a full-blown war. Inquisitors began issuing conflicting orders, entire batches of students were secretly transferred, and assassination squads were sent to eliminate rival inquisitors. When open fighting broke out between two rival factions on the world of Bellerophon IV, the conflict could no longer be hidden. Ordo Hereticus declared all Ordo Xenos operatives involved in the affair to be heretics, issuing orders for their execution. In response, Ordo Xenos launched a counteroffensive, wiping out multiple Hereticus enclaves in what was officially described as unfortunate miscommunications. By the time the conflict ended, thousands were dead, and multiple Schola Progenium facilities had been left in ruins. But the real cost was trust. From that point forward, Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos could never fully cooperate again, always suspecting the other of hidden agendas. And then there was the Nemesis incident. This one is particularly disturbing because it involved not just inquisitors, but the Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's most elite executioners. The Nemesis incident was a war fought entirely in the shadows, where inquisitors used the full might of the Assassinorum to eliminate their rivals. No one knows exactly how it started. Some claim it was a dispute over whether a particular Space Marine chapter was tainted by chaos, while others believe it was a deeper conspiracy that involved forbidden knowledge hidden in the Black Library of the Eldar. Whatever the cause, it led to one of the deadliest inquisitorial conflicts in history. At first, it was just isolated killings. A few inquisitors disappearing under mysterious circumstances, entire war bands vanishing overnight. But then it escalated. Vindicar assassins were deployed to eliminate key figures, Calexis operatives were unleashed to target radical psychers, and entire ships were lost in what were officially reported as warp accidents. For years, this war raged in complete secrecy, a game of death where the only rule was that no one outside the Inquisition could ever learn the truth. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. The war simply stopped. The last known assassination tied to the incident happened on the bridge of an inquisitorial flagship, where a high-ranking inquisitor was found, dead with a single shot to the head. No assassin was ever identified. No official records were ever made public. It was as if the entire war had never happened. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. The Inquisition is one of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy, but it is also one of the most unstable. It doesn't answer to anyone. There's no oversight, no checks and balances, no single authority keeping it in line. When inquisitors disagree, there's no court to settle their disputes. There's only war. And as history has shown time and time again, when the Inquisition goes to war with itself, the Imperium suffers. Entire planets burn, legions of warriors die, and the enemies of humanity grow stronger while the Imperium tears itself apart from within. And the worst part? It's still happening. Right now, somewhere in the Imperium, Inquisitors are fighting secret wars that no one will ever hear about. They are forging alliances, betraying allies, and making decisions that will shape the future of humanity without anyone outside their inner circles ever knowing. The question isn't whether the Inquisition will have another war. The question is how much damage it will cause when it does. The Inquisition is a law unto itself. It doesn't answer to planetary governors, the Adeptus Mechanicus, or even the High Lords of Terra, at least not officially. Each Inquisitor operates with near absolute authority, free to act on their own judgment. But if that's the case, then who, if anyone, actually controls the Inquisition? Who keeps it from spiraling into complete chaos? The answer is complicated, and depending on who you ask, it might not even exist at all. At the highest levels of the Imperium, there is a figure known as the Inquisitorial Representative, one of the High Lords of Terra. This is the closest thing the Inquisition has to a singular leader, a figure who is supposed to represent the will of the Inquisition within the Senatorum Imperialis. But here's the thing. This position isn't really about control. The Inquisitorial Representative doesn't issue orders to Inquisitors across the galaxy, doesn't set policy, and certainly doesn't have the authority to stop Inquisitors from turning on each other. They are a political figure, a voice for the Inquisition in the grander game of imperial power struggles. and if the Inquisition is already at war with itself, the representative is usually too busy navigating the treacherous politics of Terra to do anything about it. Beneath this figure are the Lords of the Inquisition, powerful senior inquisitors who hold vast influence over their respective ordos. In theory, they provide guidance, leadership, and a sense of order. In practice, they are just as divided as the rest of the Inquisition. Some of them are Purists who believe the Inquisition has become too lenient, while others are radicals who think the imperium must evolve or perish. Some are brilliant strategists, while others are paranoid, so tyrants who see betrayal in every shadow. When inquisitors fight, the Lords of the Inquisition rarely intervene directly, partly because they are often involved in the conflicts themselves. Throughout history, there have been attempts to impose control over the Inquisition, to centralize its power under a single ruler. These attempts have all ended in failure. The most infamous case was the rise of Lord Inquisitor Jarndyce Frayne, a figure who believed that the Inquisition had lost its way and needed to be restructured into a more organized and disciplined force. His plan? To create an official hierarchy, a system where junior inquisitors would answer to regional command structures and where the Inquisition's endless factionalism would finally be brought to heel. He even managed to gain the support of several influential figures within the Adeptus Administratum who saw the Inquisition's infighting as a liability. The result? The Inquisition itself turned against him. Some saw his reforms as an attempt to strip inquisitors of their autonomy. Others feared he was trying to seize too much power for himself. Some simply didn't like the idea of being told what to do. A coalition of inquisitors, including both purists and radicals, declared him a threat to the imperium and moved against him. His allies were assassinated, his networks dismantled. And when the dust settled, Frayne was dead, and his so-called Reformation was erased from history as if it had never existed. The Inquisition had made its stance clear. No one, not even the most powerful inquisitor, would ever have the authority to command them all. There are those who argue that this lack of leadership is a good thing. The Inquisition exists to root out heresy, and that requires independence. An inquisitor who must answer to a chain of command can be compromised, forced to obey orders that may not align with the true needs of the imperium. By remaining decentralized, the Inquisition ensures that no single corrupt leader can bring it down from within. But this argument ignores the reality that the Inquisition's lack of unity has already led to disaster. Without oversight, inquisitors are free to wage their own wars, to eliminate rivals based on personal grudges, to conduct purges that serve only their own interests. Some have theorized that the Emperor himself originally intended for the Inquisition to be more structured. There are records, heavily redacted of course, that suggest that during the early days of the Imperium, the first Inquisitors operated under direct guidance from Malcador the Sigillite. Malcador, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, may have envisioned a tightly controlled organization, one that would remain loyal to the ideals of the Great Crusade. But after his death, and after the horrors of the Horus Heresy, that vision was lost. The Inquisition became something else, something more secretive, more fractured, more dangerous. There have even been whispers of hidden factions that act as enforcers within the Inquisition itself, shadowy groups that exist solely to keep the most extreme inquisitors in check. Some believe that the Ordo Sicarius, a supposed offshoot of the Officio Assassinorum, operates in this capacity, eliminating inquisitors who have grown too dangerous. Others claim that certain lords of the Inquisition have formed secret pacts, agreeing to step in only when the Inquisition's conflicts threaten to spiral completely out of control. But if these groups do exist, they are just as secretive as the Inquisition itself, and their influence, if any, remains unknown. At the end of the day, the Inquisition has no true leader. It never has, and it likely never will. The Imperium is a realm of rigid hierarchies, where power flows downward in an endless chain of command. But the Inquisition is different. It is an empire within an empire, where power belongs to those who are ruthless enough to take it and cunning enough to keep it. And so the wars continue. The conflicts between Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Xenos rage on. The Purists and Radicals remain locked in their eternal struggle. There is no one to stop them, no single authority who can bring order to the chaos. The Inquisition is at war with itself, and that war will never end, not until the last Inquisitor draws their final breath. The Inquisition was created to be the ultimate defense against the Imperium's enemies. It was supposed to be ruthless, incorruptible, and willing to do whatever it took to ensure the survival of humanity. But what happens when the defenders of mankind turn their weapons on each other? What happens when the secret wars of the Inquisition spill out into the wider galaxy? The answer is simple. The Imperium suffers, and its enemies grow stronger. The Inquisition's internal conflicts have weakened the Imperium in ways that most citizens will never understand. While the Imperium's armies are busy fighting orcs, tyrannids, and chaos, war bands, inquisitors are busy fighting each other. Instead of working together to counter existential threats, they waste time purging their own ranks, sabotaging rival ordos, and covering up the messes they leave behind. The Inquisition's endless paranoia means that entire sectors can be destabilized before anyone even realizes what's happening. Wars that could have been prevented spiral out of control because different inquisitors can't agree on how to handle a situation. Resources that could be used to fight the Imperium's real enemies are instead wasted on personal vendettas. The worst part is that this infighting doesn't just create chaos, it actively helps the Imperium's enemies. The forces of chaos thrive on division, and the Inquisition is practically feeding them. Every time Ordo Malleus is distracted by hunting down radicals in Ordo Xenos instead of fighting actual demons, chaos cults have more time to spread. Every time Ordo Hereticus declares an inquisitorial war against a rival faction, valuable time and manpower are wasted while the forces of the Dark Gods grow stronger. The Inquisition is supposed to be the Imperium's greatest weapon against chaos, yet in its obsession with rooting out internal corruption, it has become one of chaos's greatest assets. And it's not just chaos that benefits. The Xenos threats facing the Imperium are vast and unrelenting, yet the Inquisition's inability to present a united front means that these threats are never dealt with properly. Ordo Xenos might have a plan to counteract the rise of a Necron dynasty, but if Ordo Hereticus suspects them of heresy, that plan might never come to fruition. There have even been cases where entire worlds have been lost to tyrannid invasions because inquisitors were too busy fighting each other to act. Every time the Inquisition turns its attention inward, it leaves the Imperium vulnerable to external threats. And the worst part? It never learns from its mistakes. One of the most frustrating things about the Inquisition is that it always assumes that its wars are necessary. Every Inquisitor believes they are fighting for the right cause, that their actions are justified. But from an outside perspective, it's obvious that the Inquisition's conflicts are as much about ego and ideology as they are about the survival of mankind. How many planets have burned because an Inquisitor wanted to prove a point? How many valuable resources have been lost because one Ordo refused to work with another? The Inquisition isn't just a weapon against the Imperium's enemies. It has become a weapon against itself. And then there's the sheer instability that these wars create. The Imperium is already on the brink of collapse. It's held together by bureaucracy, superstition, and sheer brute force. The last thing it needs is one of its most powerful organizations constantly undermining itself. Every time the Inquisition turns against its own, it creates uncertainty. Planetary governors become hesitant to follow inquisitorial orders because they don't know which faction to trust. Military commanders find themselves caught between conflicting inquisitorial decrees, unsure of whose authority they should obey. Even within the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Astra Militarum, there are whispers of doubt, because if the Inquisition itself doesn't know what it's doing, why should anyone else have faith in it? Perhaps the most terrifying thought is that the Inquisition's infighting could one day lead to the Imperium's total collapse. The Imperium is already stretched thin, fighting wars on countless fronts. If a major conflict were to erupt within the Inquisition at the wrong moment, if an inquisitorial war were to spiral out of control, drawing in Space Marine chapters, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Astra Militarum, it could fracture the Imperium beyond repair. And the worst part? It wouldn't even be an external enemy that delivered the final blow. It would be the Imperium's own, protectors too consumed by their own internal wars to realize that they had destroyed the very thing they were meant to protect. The Inquisition sees itself as humanity's last line of defense. But in its obsession with secrecy, paranoia, and ideological purity, it has become a danger to the Imperium itself. It may still be fighting the enemies of mankind, but more and more, it feels like the Inquisition is fighting for its own survival rather than the survival of the Imperium. And if that continues, then the question isn't whether the Imperium will fall, it's how much damage the Inquisition will do before it does. And in the end, when the Imperium finally falls, whether it's to chaos, to the Tyranids, or to its own crushing stagnation, there's a real chance that the Inquisition won't be the savior that it was meant to be. There's a chance that it will be the reason the Imperium didn't survive. Because when you spend more time fighting your own than fighting the enemy, the war is already lost. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the secret wars of the Inquisition, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more Warhammer lore, and let me know in the comments. What do you think is the greatest internal threat to the Imperium? Are the Inquisitors a necessary evil, or are they simply another force of destruction disguised as salvation? Let's discuss.